Would the bailiff please call court to order?
Yes. All rise. The Superior Court of the State of California, County of San Diego, Department 4 is now in session. Honorable Judge Loren Freestone presiding. Please be seated and come to order. Please turn off all cell phones and refrain from talking. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Judge Loren Freestone. On behalf of everyone here at the courthouse, I want to welcome you to the 15th annual high school mock trial competition, the most latest round. You know, from 1985 to around 1989, for about 4 years, I was exactly where you are today in high school mock trial. So I know how much effort and work goes into it, not only from the students, the after-school practices, the combing over the fact pattern, including analyzing every single little word, but also the work from the school teachers and coaches, the lawyer coaches as well as all the support and time from the parents. I know exactly what it's about and how much work really does go into it. And you should all be proud of yourself for even being here. And I think you'll find later in life, much like I did, that the skills that you learn here in mock trial will assist you in whatever goal you want to pursue. First, figuring out exactly what you're good at, and then working hard at honing those skills, and then putting those skills to work with others who've done the same thing, all to move the ship forward, so to speak. It's not much different than what happens here at the court. It's not much different than what happens in corporate America. And so I know this may not sound the best thing you want to hear today, but it doesn't really matter who wins today or whether even you decide to go to law school. I think I was the only one in my high school mock trial team to go to law school. But what you take away from today, I promise you, and from this entire experience that you have, will help you, well, it will set you up for the rest of your life. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and start with some introductions to help myself as well as the attorney scorers. With the prosecution team, state your name and role.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Albert Jen, prosecution pretrial attorney.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jasmine Criqui for the people.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Benjamin Feng for the people.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Marissa Gaut for the people. At this time, may our witnesses please introduce themselves?
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Grace Kish, and I am Remy Montoya.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Diane Zhou, and I am Officer Max Bird.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Addie Flanagan, and I am Drew Marshak.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ava Amen, and I am Dr. Kai Chavez. At this time, may our court clerk please introduce himself?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Joshua Yu, and I'll be serving as the court clerk for today's trial. Now, at this time, may I introduce the timing rules for the court?
Sure, go ahead.
I'll be giving both visual and verbal time cues of 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, as well as a visual and verbal stop. Now, at this time, may our alternates please introduce themselves?
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. Cole Frost, pretrial attorney alternate.
Good evening, Your Honor. Darren Chan, attorney alternate.
Good evening, Your Honor. Dylan Thomas, attorney alternate.
Good evening, Your Honor. Canipe, witness alternate for Remy Montoya.
Good evening, Your Honor. Shreya, witness alternate for Officer Max Bird.
Good evening, Your Honor. Olivia Schroeder, witness alternate for Drew Marshak.
Good evening, Your Honor. Nikolas Renner, witness alternate for Dr. Kai Chavez. Now with that, may our attorney coaches and teacher advisors please introduce themselves?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jack Milner, teacher advisor for the prosecution.
Good evening, Your Honor. Robert Trestman, attorney coach for the prosecution.
Good evening, Your Honor. Brandon Saxon, attorney coach for the prosecution.
Good evening to all of you. How about the defense team?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Marcelo Garbo, and I will be presenting the pretrial argument on behalf of the defense. May our co-counsel introduce themselves?
Please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jaime Hasso. I'll be presenting the closing for today's rounds, conducting the crosses of Remy Montoya as well as Dr. Kai Chavez, and I'll also be conducting the direct of Lee Croddy.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Henry Tang, and I'm directing directing Zuri O'Neill and Erin Sullivan, and I'm going to cross-examine witness Drew Marchand.
Good evening, my name is Nikolas, and I'll be presenting the opening statement as well as directing Dr. Jes Beeart as conducting the cross-examination of Sir Maxford. May our witnesses introduce themselves?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Eiffel Sunga, and I am Lee Croddy.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Semi Elliott, and I am Dr. Jes Beeart.
Good evening, Your Honor. I am Aiden O'Melina, and I will be portraying Zuri O'Neill.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Seska Catterwag, and I will be the witness Erin Sullivan. At this time, may our bailiff introduce themselves?
Yes.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Stephanie Lamelli, and I will be the courtroom bailiff this afternoon. At this time, may our attorney coaches introduce themselves?
Please. The attorney coaches.
Hi, good evening, Your Honor. Alex McDonald. I'm an attorney coach for the defense.
Good evening, Your Honor. Lonel Fuentes Vargas. I'm an attorney coach for the defense team.
Good evening, Your Honor. Jason Kanji, coach for the defense.
All right. Yeah. Good evening to all of you. With that, should we, bailiff, call the trial to order?
All rise. The Superior Court of the State of California, County of San Diego, Department 4 is now in session. Honorable Judge Loren Freestone presiding. Please be seated and come to order. Please turn off all cell phones and refrain from talking. Thank you.
All right, and before we begin, there's some instructions that I need to read to all of you. You must complete your presentation within the specified time limits. The clerk will signal you as your time for each session of the presentation begins to run out. When your total time for each session runs out, you'll be stopped, even if you've not finished. Attorneys must call 4 witnesses within that time limit. This is a bench trial. At the end of the trial, the court will render the verdict of guilty or not guilty in relation to the charge brought. The teams will be rated based upon the quality of their presentations, independent of any verdict. No recesses will be called. If for any reason a brief delay occurs due to technical issues, team members should remain in their appropriate places and should have no contact with spectators or coaches. Remember that objections are limited to the California Mock Trial Simplified Rules of Evidence located in the case packet. It says if there are no questions, why don't we go ahead and begin the pretrial arguments. With respect to those, both sides will have 4 minutes to present their arguments. The defense will begin. The court may interrupt and ask clarifying questions. Time spent answering any questions by the court is not included in the 4-minute time limit. At the conclusion of your arguments, each side will be offered 2 minutes of rebuttal time. Remember that the rebuttal time is to be used to counter your opponent's arguments and cannot be used to raise new issues. With respect to that, I believe it's the defense's motion. So is the defense ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor.
Right.
Your Honor, the defense moves to exclude statements made by Ms. Croddy to Officer Byrd on the basis of Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. As the defense will show, Ms. Croddy was in custody and asked interrogative questions. Thus, her Fifth Amendment rights were violated. The test for custodial interrogation has 2 parts. First, the circumstances of the interrogation must objectively amount to custody, which means that a reasonable person under those circumstances would believe that they are not free to leave. Second, there must be an interrogation, which can be questioning by a law enforcement or officer, or statements by the officer that the officer should know could produce incriminating responses.
Well,
Now,
but
Your Honor,
let me just go ahead and stop you there. I mean, the officer didn't ask anything specifically regarding the events. I mean, wasn't he more talking about just what the defendant ultimately was putting on the internet and his beliefs with respect to that?
the phrasing used by Officer Byrd in this situation made Miss Croddy feel like a suspect because of the terminology that was used, labeling her as an anarchist and not even asking questions, but started to even make statements that would link Miss Croddy's content to the arrest that literally just happened right before she went into the car.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Second, there must be an interrogation, which can be questioning by a law enforcement officer or statements by the officer that the officer should know can produce incriminating responses. Now, Your Honor, I invite your attention to my first point, which is custody. The first part is that a reasonable person would have felt in custody in the police vehicle because first, there was a clearly identified police radio inside. It was driven by a police officer heading to a police station. And it would be dangerous to jump out of a moving vehicle and would also create further suspicion if Miss Croddy were to have jumped out of the vehicle.
Well, I guess let me stop you there again. I mean, wasn't this case similar to the People versus Andreasen, that it was really just a casual conversation in the back of a car?
Although it may seem that way at first, there's a few ways we can differentiate between People versus Andreasen and the case we have today. The first of which is the fact that in People versus Andreasen, the defendant in that case was already known to be very aggressive, and they tried to start a casual conversation to decrease aggression. But what we can see in this case is that the officer asked questions that were clearly not trying to decrease aggression, but rather increase aggression from Miss Croddy in order to try to elicit an incriminating response, and created that coercive environment.
All right.
May I continue?
You may continue.
Thank you. The officer created a coercive environment because he used accusatory language against Lee Croddy, which was specifically done after the fact, once Miss Croddy was already in the car. The officer did not treat Lee like a suspect until they were in a vulnerable position in the car that they were not able to escape from. Although Miss Croddy initially got into the car willingly, she had a right to revoke that consent once she felt uncomfortable, which was clear to the and when it was clear to the officer that believed her to be a suspect. And Miss Croddy even tried to assert her Miranda rights, but were ignored, clearly indicated when she asked, "Do I need my lawyer?" The officer should have advised Miss Croddy of her Miranda rights at this point. Anything you can say will be used against you, and that you have the right to have a lawyer present. However, the officer didn't do that and decided to double down, making even further accusations that her content can be in fact taken out of context. Now, we can draw similarities to the case of People v. Boyer, as detectives constantly ignored the attempts by the defendant to assert his Miranda rights to silence the counsel. The detectives failed to honor the defendant's request for an attorney and instead began a new conversation about the case, considering the coercive environment was a reasonably calculated attempt to elicit an incriminating response. Similar to this case, where even after Miss Croddy asserted her Miranda rights, the officer decided to continue with statements linking Miss Croddy and making her feel like a suspect. Now, Your Honor, let's invite your attention to the second point.
1 minute.
Statements were reasonably likely to elicit an incriminating response. Rhode Island v. Innis sets a precedent that its interrogation is any words or actions that are reasonably likely, that the police know are reasonably likely to elicit an incriminating response from the subject. And this happens 3 separate times. First is when the officer calls Miss Croddy an anarchist. And the officer, after Miss Croddy responded, the officer stopped the conversation to respond to a radio call, but started the conversation once again with the
30
statement
seconds.
to elicit another incriminating response, that her stuff can be taken that way. And then after that, a third time that her content can be taken out of context. Clear indications that the officer was trying to elicit an incriminating response. And for these reasons, Your Honor, we can see we should be excluding these statements on the basis of Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Prosecution, your response?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, it's the prosecution's position that Lee Croddy's statements on page 32, 39, and 40 be allowed in today's trial. Firstly, because it would be a flagrant mistake to label the interaction as a custodial interrogation. And secondly, because of the fact that there was zero elicitation of incrimination. Now, the central issue in this case is whether or not a custodial interrogation took place in the unmarked police vehicle. Lines 6 through 13 of page 16 breaks it down for us, as does opposing counsel. There are just two components to determining custodial interrogation. First, the circumstances of the interrogation must objectively amount to custody, meaning that it can't be a casual conversation. And second, there must be an interrogation where the officer should positively know that their questions could produce incriminating responses. We'll begin first by disproving the first qualification.
Let me stop you right there. Where does the fact that the defendant at least 2 times questions the fact that maybe he should have a lawyer, where does that play in?
So opposing counsel tries to champion the case People v. Boyer to back up the request for an attorney. But the prosecution would like to point out a glaring distinguishing factor between the case of People v. Boyer and today's case. In People v. Boyer, the detectives failed to honor the defendant's consistent and explicit request for an attorney. Comparatively, in today's case, all Lee did was ask if he needed a lawyer, which does not amount to an assertion of his Miranda rights. Simply stated, do I need a lawyer is extremely different from I need a lawyer now, which is why opposing counsel's claim in response to your third question is incorrect and invalid in today's case.
All right, you may continue.
We'll begin by disproving the first qualification. This is why the circumstances did not ignite feelings of custody. Lee Croddy made the decision herself to accept a carpool offer, an offer of transportation. Lee Croddy opened the unmarked police car's door, sat herself down, and accepted an offer for a ride to the police station, all of which was under her own volition. And even though the defense will champion this single police radio sitting in the front seat as an end-all environmenting disrupting piece of evidence, even though Officer Byrd's occupation was made clear to Lee Croddy, I direct the court's attention to 2 distinguishing factors. First, the vehicle sported a civilian plain paint job, and its roof was devoid of a police siren. And second, the interior.
Let me stop you there. I mean, there's no question that he was in a police vehicle, right?
That's correct, Your Honor. It's the prosecution.
So it's not like he was riding in an Uber or a Lyft or some ride share, was he?
That's correct, Your Honor. He was not. Yet it's the prosecution's opinion and in line with the components of the first component of custodial interrogation, which is to prove a custodial environment, that if the prosecution is able to prove a casual environment, which leads to a casual conversation or any sort of casualness within the conversation, then that custodial interrogation is not considered one in and of itself. To restate that, the prosecution is pointing towards these elements of a condition, just like opposing counsel is pointing towards how perhaps he wasn't able to get out of the moving car.
All right, thank you. You may continue.
Second, the interior of the vehicle was devoid of the traditional metal cage that is supposed to separate the front seat from the back seat. So while opposing counsel paints a picture of an isolated Lee Croddy, the prosecution would like the court to remember that it was Lee Croddy's own decision to accept an offer of a carpool from a civilian painted car with no police siren and no metal cage separating the back seat from the front seat. This casual nature and casual setting of the unmarked vehicle matters in today's holding because in the case of People v. Torres, the court's analysis admits that universally, No interrogation means no to a requirement of Miranda warnings and yes to admissibility. Moving on, the second mandatory condition of custodial interrogation falls flat as well, because the defense's burden further requires that the conversation was designed deliberately by Byrd to elicit incriminating evidence from Lee. In Rhode Island v. Innis, the court's analysis admitted that without reasonable elicitation of incriminating evidence, the event cannot be considered an interrogation. Here is that very exact situation in today's case. Officer Byrd's grand scheme of just connecting a familiar face to a social influencer was simply asking Lee about their content being taken from an anarchist perspective. Nothing in the conversation is there any further incriminating accusation. Insofar as having one's content being taken out of context in an anarchist perspective, that's simply not a crime. Furthermore, facts of pretrial on page 17 solidify the absence of eliciting incrimination, because Officer Byrd specifically stated that she was not talking about Ms. Montoya's actions and that she was speaking generally about Ms. Croddy's content being misinterpreted. The direct quote is as follows: "I was speaking generally that your content can be taken out of context." Now, with the recognition of a casual conversation and the absence of eliciting incrimination, the prosecution respectfully requests that you admit the statements made by Lee Croddy.
All right, thank you. Rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, let's get straight to the first point about custody. Now, the problem is the prosecution is leaving out one of the biggest arguments made by the defense today: the right to revoke consent, something which the prosecution didn't even bother to touch. So what we can see is that one of the main arguments made by the defense is the fact that Ms. Croddy could never have expected to be in a situation where she would be interrogated in the first place. Because although Ms. Croddy initially got into the car willingly, that is correct, she had the right to revoke that consent once she felt uncomfortable, which was, again, indicated multiple times when the officer clearly showed that the officer believed her to be a suspect due to the terminology used by the officer and the multiple assertions of Miranda rights, which were a clear revoke of consent in that case scenario. So although the beginning was in fact voluntary, that revoke of consent was what really differentiated it and made it so that a reasonable person would in fact interpret that Ms. Croddy was in custody, due to the fact that, again, the argument about revoking consent, the clear indications that it was a police officer, the fact that they just arrested somebody right before she got into the car, and the fact that it would simply be dangerous to jump out of a moving vehicle. So the officer clearly intended to only ask these questions once Ms. Croddy was in a vulnerable position. 30 seconds. Interrogation, for somebody trying to have a casual conversation, words like anarchist, your stuff can be taken out of context, and similar terminology would not be used in a casual conversation to decrease aggression like in People versus Andreessen. Whereas in this case, the officer was clearly trying to elicit aggression by having negative connotation and repeatedly, 3 separate times, start conversations with occasionally not even statements that would elicit information.
All right, the prosecution's rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel's response to your first question in pretrial is exactly what Stansbury v. California dictates. Understand that the holding explains how a trial court cannot consider a defendant to be in custody on the basis of subjective conclusions only when the officer considers the defendant a suspect. The prosecution and the defense understand that the facts of pretrial explain how Lee Croddy was never considered to be a suspect during the interaction, thus there was no custody. Opposing counsel's response to Your Honor's third question is also incorrect. This is the reason why it's still applicable to today's case. Because even if there was no aggression, like with Andreessen, the motivation for starting a casual conversation is not touched upon anywhere within the case's reasoning. The case's ruling relies on the presence of a casual conversation, not the backstory behind it. Now, opposing counsel's second main argument is incorrect because accusatory language, something that opposing counsel champions over and over again, does not amount to incrimination. There is no charge. There is no crime for having your content being taken out of context from an anarchist perspective, completely bypassing the second necessary condition of custodial interrogation. Now, I'd like to end by addressing the concept of revoking consent, something opposing counsel spends their rebuttal on. There was none of that, because in People v. Boyer, the case that opposing counsel champions, the detectives failed to honor the defendant's consistent and explicit request for an attorney. Comparatively, all Lee did was, in today's case, was ask if he needed a lawyer, which does not amount to an assertion of his Miranda rights. Do I need a lawyer is extremely different from I need a lawyer now, which means that there was no revoking of consent. And my argument and the prosecution's argument, considering the casualness of the conversation, is still valid in today's case. With that, we request that the statements are admitted in today's trial.
All right, thank you both. Before the court rules on the motions, the students may confer with their attorney or teacher coaches regarding any irregularities, so please go ahead and do so now. And you have 60 seconds to do that.
Seconds. Stop.
All right, would the, let me start with the prosecution side. Any irregularities?
No irregularities, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. From the defense?
No irregularities, Your Honor.
All right, thank you as well. Based upon the evidence that the court has before it, as well as argument by counsel, both sides, the court finds that the statements by the officer were made in such a way that the officer should have known that they could have produced incriminating responses, and based upon that would exclude those statements from the trial. So now with that, let me go ahead and read the charges against the defendant. The people of the state of California are charging the defendant, Lee Croddy, in 2 counts. 1, aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary committed by Remy Montoya, and 2, as an accessory after the fact to a felony committed by Remy Montoya. With that reading of the charge, are we prepared to go forward with an opening statement? Let me start with the prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. If you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, my name is Jasmine Criqui, the prosecutor representing the people of the state of California in this action. One young, vulnerable fan, one innocent victim. As you hear this case today, know that the fateful meeting between these two was not orchestrated by destiny, but by a puppet master, an expert manipulator who used her celebrity status to advance her own agenda. On February 15th, Drew Marshak's home was broken into, her property was taken from her, and her sense of privacy and security was shattered. No one in this courtroom today disputes the injustice of this incident. However, it would be a gross oversimplification of the case before us to only consider the events of February 15th in order to assign guilt. In reality, February 15th's injustice was the culmination of a months-long effort by the defendant to emotionally manipulate Remy Montoya, one of the defendant's most devoted fans, into committing the crime that the defendant didn't want on her hands. Calcrim 400 and 401 explain that the defendant has aided and abetted a crime if they knew that the perpetrator meant to commit the crime and consciously helped them to do so. Furthermore, Calcrum 440 states that the defendant is an accessory to a crime if they knew that the perpetrator had committed the crime and still helped them in order to help them maintain arrest. In both cases, it is abundantly clear that the defendant did just that. Today, Ms. Montoya herself will shed light on how the defendant took advantage of her adoration of them by singling her out specifically, despite the presence of multiple other fans of the defendants in Beacon Hills at the time of the meet and greet, and by puppeteering her into believing that the defendant's career was dependent on the documents, and by extension, Ms. Montoya. Then, Officer Max Bird will lay out the defendant's franticness upon Montoya's arrest and their knowledge of Ms. Montoya's wrongdoing. Furthermore, Drew Marshak will testify to the harm she suffered as a result of the defendant's machinations, to the distinctive nature of her briefcase, and to Ms. Montoya's addled state at the time of the incident. Finally, the prosecution will prove that not only did Lee Croddy have full knowledge as to the lengths Ms. Montoya was willing to go to please her, including crossing the line into violence, but that she methodically and purposefully perpetuated Ms. Montoya's adoration in an online setting through the use of groupthink, a manipulative practice that Dr. Kai Chavez will walk us through. Not only did the puppet master give Ms. Montoya all of the information and motivation she needed to commit this heinous crime, but she harbored her after the fact until a neighbor alerted the police of her presence in the defendant's home. By the conclusion of this trial, myself and my co-counsel, Marissa Gaut and Benjamin Feng, will have proved beyond all reasonable doubt that the defendant, Lee Croddy, is guilty of both aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary and accessory after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you. The defense, your opening statement.
Whenever you're ready, Your Honor.
I'm ready, so whenever you are.
Thank you. Actions speak louder than words. The only true criminal in this trial is one lone actor, Remy Montoya. Her actions, not in dispute. She broke into someone's home, assaulted them, and stole their property. There will be no words at this trial that show that Lee Croddy ever planned for this to happen, caused for this to happen, or even wanted this to happen. The actions will speak louder and prove her innocence. Now, I would like to begin by introducing you to Lee Croddy. Lee is an entrepreneur who runs her own online news business. Over the years, she had built quite a large online following with well over 1 million subscribers to her service. She would host meet and greet events with their fans and have online group chats to show them gratitude for the support. There was one specific meet and greet that we will focus on in this case, and it took place on February 15, 2020. Shortly before the event, Lee shared with her friends new information she received. A copy of a report written by Drew Marshak, an investigator for the California Department of Justice. Lee encouraged her followers to sit down and demand more information from Mr. Marshak, but peacefully and without violence. Lee knew one of her followers, Remy Montoya, would be in the area, so she asked her to go down to Miss Marshak's home and answers, but told her, "Don't do anything I wouldn't do." Miss Montoya took a different course of action. She broke into Miss Marshak's home, burglarized it, and assaulted her. While Miss Montoya was out committing crimes, Lee was hosting the meet and greet event. When Miss Montoya eventually arrived, Lee could tell she was upset. Miss Montoya never really told her what she did, nor did she even show anyone the stolen goods. Lee, thinking everything was fine, allowed her to stay at the event and even invited her to stay at her guest house afterwards. The next morning, Lee was shocked to see a police officer on her property, but wanted to cooperate. She remained calm, cool, and collected, but most importantly, cooperative with law enforcement. She spoke to the officer, showed him where Miss Montoya stayed, and made it very clear that she was not aware of what had happened and had no part in this burglary. Because, Your Honor, The lone criminal actor is Remy Montoya, who now has a plea bargain to testify with the prosecutor against Lee Croddy. We will call to the stand Zuri O'Neill and Erin Sullivan, who will tell you that Lee's journalism is dedicated to social change, not unrest. Lee never promoted violence against others. Finally, you will hear from Dr. Jes Beeart, a PhD in sociology, who will tell you that Remy's actions are that of a best fan who took things way too far, and there will be no words to overcome that. The actions will speak louder. By the end of this trial, you will be convinced, Your Honor, that the true criminal is not seated at the defense table, but is seated along the prosecution and cooperation agreement in hand. It is for these reasons we will ask you to return the only just verdict, finding Lee Croddy not guilty of all charges. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. The prosecution, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Prosecution, before we begin, Your Honor, the prosecution would like to address a few preliminary matters.
All right.
The prosecution moves to pre-mark exhibits A, B, and C for identification. The prosecution requests that the image of Drew Marshak's briefcase be marked as exhibit A. And the prosecution requests that the February 12th group chat, Twitter group chat, be marked as exhibit B. And the prosecution requests that the February 14th WhatsApp conversation between Lee Croddy and Remy Montoya be marked as exhibit C.
Defense, any response? Aren't those already part of the record?
No response here, Your Honor.
Okay, all right. So those will be identified as A, B, and C. You ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Remy Montoya to the stand.
Calling Remy Montoya to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony that you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conduct and rules of the mock trial competition?
Did we have an audio response?
I do. Thank you.
All right, you may begin when ready.
Your Honor, before I begin the direct examination, the people request that the defendant turn on their camera for a brief moment so that the witness can know identifying features.
Okay. The defendant, you turn on your camera.
Ms. Montoya, do you know Ms. Croddy?
Yes.
Do you see them on the screen?
Yes, they have a black jacket and black hair.
Thank you. May the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
The record will so reflect.
Ms. Montoya, could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Remy Montoya. I'm 21 years old. I'm a sales associate for Thinker Toys Corporation, and I'm a proud student at Beacon Hills Community College. Just looking to minimize some student debt. You know how it is.
Thank you. So how did you first become acquainted with the defendant?
I first found one of Lee's videos while researching the Roswell UFO crash of 1947. It was out of this world. I mean, I immediately fell in love with all of Lee's content and followed all of her socials.
Was your only connection to Lee through watching her videos?
That's how it started, but in March, Lee invited me to join a group chat with her and around 5 other passionate fans. In July, I was chosen to go to a panel and to have lunch with Lee, and the next month, I was even lucky enough to appear on one of her Instagram live streams.
What other direct interactions, if any, did you have with her?
I've met her at a couple of her meet and greets, and we've also communicated 2 to 3 times per week through comments, likes, and the group chat.
Thank you. Now, moving on, could you briefly walk us through the events on February 12th, 2020?
Of course. The day before, Lee had tweeted about an exciting upcoming video regarding government secrets. On February 12th, Lee sent a sneak peek of the video, along with some messages saying things such as mobilizing, taking what is ours, and demanding answers to the group chat. Lee also held up some official-looking documents in the video.
What
Objection, hearsay?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the objection.
Hearsay.
Your Honor, may I be
Okay.
heard?
Well, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Your response.
Your Honor, not only is this statement an admission by the party opponent, in this case, Lee Croddy, the defendant, if opposing counsel has read stipulation 6, they'll know that Remy Montoya can testify to anything in the group chat, including this statement, without any objection.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Ms. Montoya, what, if anything, was shown on the documents in the sneak peek?
There was the name and address of the government official, Zhou Marshak.
Was there anything particularly important from the full video itself?
Once it was released, there was sort of this, fully released, there was sort of this direct call to action from Lee to us group chat members. I remember Lee saying to get down to where that official lives if necessary and to demand answers.
What do you mean by a direct call?
Well, I felt it was a direct call because, to my knowledge, only the group chat members had access to the sneak peek video with the address.
And was there anything particularly important that happened the day after this direct call?
Yes, Lee messaged me asking if I was in the Beacon Hills area. I was, so I messaged her back confirming.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Ms. Montoya, do you have Exhibit C on hand?
I do.
Do you recognize Exhibit C?
Yes.
What is it?
It is a February 14th WhatsApp text conversation between Lee and I.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of your text conversation?
It is.
Your Honor, the people request that Exhibit C be moved into evidence. Ms. Montoya, do you mind reading lines 11 through 13?
I need you to go to that agent Marshak's place. It's near you. Get the rest of the documents.
Ms. Montoya, do you also mind reading lines 29 through 31?
I know you do, but we need those documents, Remy. You really need to get into that house tomorrow.
Thank you. After Lee sent you that, what happened next?
I did what I was asked to do. I got the documents. On February 15th, I broke into Mrs. Marshak's house, took her briefcase, took information off of her computer, and ran into her on my way out. She tried to take the briefcase back, and in my panic, I punched her in the face and then ran to the house.
What did you do after?
Well, I was completely overwhelmed because it was never my intention to hurt anybody. So I thought the best thing to do would be to go to the scheduled meet and greet, find Lee, and ask for her help. And I brought the briefcase with me.
Once you got there, what did you say to her?
I specifically remember telling Lee that I had gotten the stuff she wanted from the house, but that I had a run-in with Mrs. Marshak.
And how were you able to eventually overcome your state of panic?
I didn't do it alone. Lee offered me a ride back to her place and assured me that no problem was too big to be solved, which was relieving.
What, if anything, happened on the car ride back to her home?
In my frustration, I shouted something about all my problems being because of the stupid briefcase. Lee asked if it was just a prop, and I got angry. Because why would I be freaking out so much over something as little as a prop?
And what did the defendant do when you were brought into their house?
Lee led me through the back entrance of their house, and I asked for a place to stay until I wasn't being followed anymore. Lee showed zero hesitation and immediately showed me to her guest house.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Before you took the witness stand today, you entered into a contract with the DA's office.
Objection, Your Honor. Unfair extrapolation.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what?
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Before you took the witness stand today, you entered into a contract with the prosecution?
I'm not really sure if it would be considered a contract with the prosecution, whether my sentencing would be decreased or not.
A plea bargain, right?
I honestly don't know what would happen and if that is considered such.
Okay. This contract entails testifying against Lee Croddy.
Objection, Your Honor, unfair extrapolation.
Overruled.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
This contract entails testifying against Lee Croddy.
I would just say I'm here to provide truthful testimony about this situation and all.
And your sentence depends on this testimony.
I'm not positive.
You'll find out your sentence after you complete your side of the contract, right?
That is correct.
You were a big fan of Lee's, correct?
I was a devout follower. That's why Lee chose me out of everyone to finish his plan. So, yes.
You thought she was brilliant?
Once again, yes.
You wanted to be there with Lee at Drew Marshak's home to demand those documents.
Lee told us to demand answers and take what is ours. I was simply following in my idol's footsteps. So,
You
yeah.
were the one. Okay. Lee never explicitly told you to commit a burglary, did she?
Lee said that I needed to get into the house and I needed to get the documents. But
Did
no,
she say in words, commit a burglary?
no, he didn't. No, she did not.
She wasn't even with you when you went to the house?
She wasn't in the area herself. That's why she asked me to do it.
She wasn't at the house, right?
She was not.
When you first got there, you actually knocked on the door?
That is correct.
You chose to do that on your own?
After Lee asked me to go to the house, correct.
You entered the home through an open window?
Correct.
You chose to do that on your own?
Once again, after Lee insisted on me getting into the house, correct.
But you still did it alone, right?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Sustained.
You then grabbed the briefcase.
Correct.
You chose to do that on your own?
Lee said to get the documents and there was a large insignia on it, so I believed there would be something in it, correct.
You were the one that grabbed the briefcase, right?
Yes, I was in the house by myself, so my actions in there were just my own once again.
You then went onto Miss Marshak's computer
Correct.
and downloaded information onto a thumb drive?
I did.
You kept that thumb drive to yourself.
I'm sorry. Do you mean I just never showed anyone, or was it?
You kept it in your own possession?
I did, yes.
You put it in your pocket?
I believe so, yes.
You chose to do that on your own?
Yes, I made the conscious choice to place it in my pocket, correct.
Then you saw Miss Marshak.
Yes, I ran into her while I was exiting the house.
You punched Miss Marshak?
She was trying to take the briefcase back. I was scared Lee would be angry with me if I didn't get it, so yeah, I panicked.
You chose to do that on your own as well, right?
Lee said we needed to demand answers and take what is ours, especially for Mrs. Marshak, and unfortunately, in the way I did it, I did decide by myself to punch her in the face.
Ms. Montoya, now I'd like to discuss the meet and greet you attended. You spoke to Lee at the event, right?
I did.
But you don't remember everything you said?
That's not true. I specifically remember. Oh, not everything? Sorry, correct.
You had the briefcase at the event.
Yes, I had it with me from the time I went to Mrs. Marshak's house to the time I went to Lee's house.
You testified that you stole it because Lee wanted it?
Lee wanted the documents. I believe there would be them in the briefcase, correct?
You believed it was urgent?
Lee stressed the urgency of me getting them, especially since the meet and greet was that day.
Yet you never actually opened the briefcase for Lee, right?
Correct.
Or shared the contents of the documents with her?
Well, something was obviously wrong with me. I mean, Lee kept looking genuinely concerned, so it's not like he didn't know something was up.
That wasn't my question. Did you show her what was inside the briefcase?
I did not.
Lee told you to stay at the event, right?
Correct.
Lee even took you to her home right after?
Yes, she was worried for me. She led me to her guest house.
During the ride, she asked you if the briefcase was a prop.
Yes, she did.
At that moment, when Lee asked you if it was a prop, you still didn't show Lee what was inside the briefcase, right?
I did not.
Eventually, you arrived at Lee's house.
That's correct.
You knew Lee had a secret bunker?
I was aware of it from the videos.
You wanted to see that bunker yourself, right?
Well, I was excited because it belonged to my idol, but I wasn't really sure if we were going there or not. It was just a possibility, but it wasn't really probable.
Lee didn't take you there, right?
No, once again, she took me to the guest house.
And that's where you stayed until you were arrested?
Correct.
With your briefcase?
Yes, I had the briefcase with me the entire time.
And yet you still did not show Lee what was inside the briefcase?
The briefcase had a large official insignia on it. It was clear that it was something of great value, but no, I never showed it to him.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
All right.
Ms. Montoya, what have you agreed to do for today's trial?
Today, I am here to simply offer truthful testimony for the case at hand. I'm not here to convict or prosecute anyone on my own.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. Next witness, prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the prosecution calls Officer Max Bird.
Calling Officer Max Bird to the stand. Can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony that you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
Thank you.
All right. You may begin when ready.
Your Honor, before I begin the direct examination, the people request that the defendant turn on their camera for a brief moment once again so that the witness can note identifying features.
All right. The defendant may turn on the camera.
Officer Bird, do you know Mrs. Croddy?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Do you see them on the screen?
Yes, ma'am. They are wearing a black jacket and have black hair.
May the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the defendant?
The records will so reflect.
Good evening, Officer Bird.
Good evening, ma'am.
Could you tell us a little bit about your credentials?
Of course, ma'am. I am an officer with the Beacon County Sheriff's Station in Beacon County, California. I've been working there for about a decade now, which does classify me as a veteran.
Could you tell us how you got involved with today's case?
Yes, ma'am. The station received a call at 3:12 p.m. from Drew Marshak saying she had been robbed. I immediately rushed to the scene.
What did you see when you arrived?
I saw Marshak in a daze and with multiple wounds. She had a wound to the face and a large gash on her forehead.
What, if any, information were you given about the robbery?
Mrs. Marshak gave me a physical description of the perpetrator and also informed me that the perpetrator stole her briefcase, which contained confidential government information.
What were your next steps in the case?
The station then sent out an APB with a sketch of the perpetrator. The next morning, we received a tip from someone who claimed to recognize the suspect, which prompted me to go to the defendant's house.
What did you see when you got to the scene?
When I arrived at the scene, I saw someone who matched the sketch pacing across the yard. She identified herself as Remy Montoya, and I placed her under arrest.
What, if anything, did she say to you?
Ma'am, she was frantically saying to join a revolution against the government and to join us, as she...
I'm sorry, the objection?
Hearsay, Your Honor.
Response?
Your Honor, this statement is used to show the state of mind of Remy rather than the truth of the matter. So this would not be hearsay.
All right, so non-hearsay, the court would overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Officer Bird, did you get a chance to finish your response?
No, ma'am, I did not. Miss Montoya was frantically saying to join a revolution against the government and to join us, as she nodded towards the house.
Was anybody in this house?
Someone who was later identified as Lee Croddy came out of her house and nervously started asking what Montoya did and took.
At this point, what information had you given the defendant about Montoya's crime?
I had not given them any information yet, ma'am, so I found this response to be strange.
Let's move on to the events of later that day. What steps did you take when you arrived at the station?
I wanted to conduct an interview with the defendant, but she refused to talk until her lawyer came to the station.
What interactions did the station have with Remy?
I questioned Montoya, and she revealed that the defendant was the one who provided her with Mrs. Marshak's address and instructed her to get into the house and steal the papers.
What were your final actions in the case?
I considered Miss Croddy a suspect and soon conducted interviews with both Zuri O'Neill and Erin Sullivan. After gathering all of this information, I arrested the defendant and charged her with aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary and accessory after the fact.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Officer, I'd like to talk to you about the actions of Miss Montoya and Miss Croddy on the day of Miss Montoya's arrest. Is that all right with you?
Yes, ma'am.
When you arrived at Lee Croddy's home, you saw an individual pacing in the front yard. It was Remy Montoya, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
They were frantic?
Yes, that's correct. She seemed extremely frantic.
Yelling?
Objection, Your Honor. This is not a question.
Overruled.
In your
Miss,
words, they were causing a commotion?
Sorry, ma'am. Could you repeat that question, please?
Of course. In your words, they were causing a commotion?
That's correct. I would say so, ma'am.
During this commotion, Lee Croddy came out of their home?
That is also correct, ma'am.
Miss Croddy answered your questions?
That's correct, ma'am.
She was compliant?
Yes, that's correct.
She spoke to you willingly?
That's correct, ma'am.
She explained how she knew Miss Montoya?
That is also correct, ma'am.
She also explained how Miss Montoya got there?
That's correct, ma'am.
Even showed you where Miss Montoya stayed?
Yes, I asked and Miss Croddy complied, so that's correct, ma'am.
It was a guest house?
That's correct.
Lee took you to the guest house willingly?
Yes, ma'am. Once again, I asked and Lee obliged.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, any redirect?
None, Your Honor. May this witness be excused?
Yes, the witness may be excused. Any other witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Drew Marshak to the stand.
All right.
Calling Drew Marshak to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of mock trial competition?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, you may begin when ready.
Your Honor, before we begin, the prosecution requests a time check.
Okay, time check.
The prosecution has 5 minutes and 45 seconds remaining for direct examinations, and the defense has 2 minutes and 50 seconds remaining for cross-examination.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I begin?
Yes, you begin when ready.
Good evening, Ms. Marshak. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, I'm Drew Marshak. I'm 42 years old, and I've been an investigator with the California State Department of Justice's Bureau of Investigation for over 15 years now.
Can you briefly explain what your work at the Bureau entails?
In general, it involves the collection and analysis of time-sensitive material. Much of my work involves confidential matters, therefore I can't disclose much information.
I'm now going to ask you some questions about the events that took place on February 15th.
Okay.
What did you do on the afternoon of February 15th?
Well, I drove to my house around 3 o'clock after coming back from the grocery store. After parking in the driveway, I noticed that the side gate was slightly open.
And what was your reaction to noticing that?
Well, I wasn't too worried at all because I occasionally leave the side gate unlocked for my gardener, and I honestly couldn't remember if I had left it open or not, so I just walked to the front door like I normally do.
What happened after you entered your home?
I saw that there were faint, muddy footprints on the floor inside. When I stepped into the entryway, I saw someone who was later identified as Remy Montoya turn the corner from my sitting room and into the entryway.
What was your reaction to seeing Ms. Montoya in your home?
I tried to stop Remy, but she punched me in the face and I lost my balance. I fell backwards and the front of my head collided with the edge of a small table.
How did you feel after hitting your head?
Well, I felt slightly dizzy, but I clearly remember seeing her standing over me, holding my state-issued briefcase.
Miss Marshak, do you have Exhibit A on hand?
Yes, I do.
Do you recognize the object shown in this exhibit?
Yes, that's my state-issued briefcase. It's engraved with my first initial, my full last name, and my work insignia. I'd know it anywhere.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of your briefcase as you remember it?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the prosecution requests that the briefcase be moved into evidence as Exhibit A.
Any objection from the defense?
No, Your Honor. No
Mhm.
objection.
That'll be admitted. Go ahead.
Ms. Marshak, what, if anything, did you hear Ms. Montoya say while standing over you holding this briefcase?
Remy was muttering audibly and cursing. I remember her saying, "Oh no, what have I done? What am I doing?" She also muttered, "Lee is not going to like this, and at least we got the proof we needed."
What else, if anything, did you hear Ms. Montoya say as she fled the scene?
Before she fled the scene, I distinctly remember Remy looked at me and quickly said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I had to do it. I had to do it. This is for the people." After Remy was gone, I called 911.
And finally, Ms. Marshak, are you at liberty to discuss the contents of this briefcase?
I am obligated to keep the material confidential. However, I can confirm there were documents containing sensitive government matters.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right. Cross-examination.
Before I start cross-examination, could I ask the clerk for a time check?
Okay. Time check again.
The defense has 2 minutes and 50 seconds remaining for cross-examination.
Thank you. Is it fine if I start now?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you saw Ms. Montoya in your home, you were able to see her demeanor.
Yes, that is true.
She appeared worried.
Yes, as one would probably act after they had just been caught for committing a crime.
And she looked panicked to you.
Yes, as I said, I bet she was worried after she got caught.
And then she looked frantic, right?
Yes, that is true.
And Remy Montoya even made some statements while in the state while looking at you.
Yes, she did.
And after Ms. Montoya punched you, she said, "Oh no, what have I done? What am I doing?"
Objection, Your Honor. Vague and ambiguous. This isn't a question.
I asked her if she said that. And
Well, why don't you go ahead and rephrase it?
after Ms. Montoya punched you, did she say, "Oh no, what have I done? What am I doing?"
Yes, she did say that.
And after this, you even heard her say, "Lee isn't going to like this."
Yes, I'm sure Lee was not going to be happy with the fact that she got caught for stealing my briefcase.
2 minutes.
No further questions.
All right, any redirect?
None, Your Honor. May this witness be excused?
Yes, the witness is excused. Any other witnesses from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the prosecution calls Dr. Kai Chavez.
All right.
Calling Dr. Kai Chavez to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of mock trial competition?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, you may begin.
Good evening, Dr. Chavez.
Good evening.
Let's begin with your qualifications. Could you tell us a bit about your education?
Sure. In 2004, I earned my bachelor's degree studying psychology at the University of South Hudson, and then went on to pursue a master's degree in 2011 with 3 years of residency.
What kind of work do you do now?
In my private practice, I prescribe medication and provide psychotherapy to patients with various psychiatric illnesses. I've also served as an expert witness in about 150 cases.
What fields of psychology do you specialize in?
I mainly research mental illnesses that affect mood and personality in extreme and inflexible ways. I have also done extensive research on the psychological phenomena of groupthink.
Now let's move on to your assessment of today's case. To start, could you describe the concept of groupthink?
Of course. Groupthink occurs when certain groups value conformity, limiting individual decision-making. This creates an environment that can lead to disastrous consequences.
Could you explain how groupthink translates to an online environment?
The online setting often amplifies groupthink's negative effects. This often occurs in fan bases of internet personalities, like the defendant. The fans are more likely to cyberbully or dox somebody who the online celebrity portrays in a negative light. Though these fans are acting individually, their behavior is a result of the groupthink environment created by the celebrity.
How does groupthink apply to the case at hand?
In the group chat, it's clear that the toxic environment established by the defendant directly influenced the fans' individual behavior, which is a clear indication of groupthink.
Could you please explain how the defendant contributed to the creation of a dangerous environment?
The defendant went on long, angry rants in their YouTube channel and spoke out against the
30
government,
seconds.
promoting a hostile environment for their fans. This, combined with the direct calls to action against Drew Marshak in the group chats, created a groupthink setting that made it difficult to make individual decisions.
In your professional opinion, what role did the defendant play in Remy's actions?
In my professional opinion, the defendant's establishment of a toxic environment that encouraged criminal behavior makes her a puppet master who is responsible for Remy's actions.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Doctor, you reviewed the group chat conversation with Lee Croddy, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
You reviewed the group chat conversation with Lee Croddy?
Yes, I did.
You described it as a toxic environment.
Yes, definitely.
In all of Lee's postings, she didn't tell her followers to hurt people?
No, but that isn't including the individual group chats and chats.
That was a no, right?
That's a no.
She didn't tell them to break into people's homes?
No, not explicitly.
And she never told them to rob anyone?
No, again, not explicitly.
It is your opinion that this concept of groupthink can limit individual creativity and decision-making?
Yes, that's correct.
Lee didn't force Ms. Montoya to go to Drew Marshak's house, correct?
Again, this isn't very black and white, but not explicitly. Groupthink is something that really takes a hold of a person's mentality and uses that to their advantage.
Ms. Montoya went alone?
Yes.
1 minute.
Lee did not even go with Ms. Montoya to the house, right?
No, she did not.
Remy broke in on her own?
Yes.
It is also your opinion that the actions of those in a groupthink environment can be an expression of the leading figure?
Yes, that's very true.
Here, that figure would be Lee.
Yes, that's correct.
In other words, it's your opinion that Remy Montoya stole the briefcase for Lee?
Yes, definitely.
It's your opinion that Lee wanted these documents, right?
Yes, Lee did explicitly tell her to go
30
in.
seconds.
You're aware, though, that Ms. Montoya never actually gave the briefcase to Lee, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
She never opened the briefcase for Lee?
No, she did not.
She kept it all to herself?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any other witnesses from the prosecution?
None, Your Honor. At this time, the prosecution rests.
All right, thank you very much. Now let's turn to the defense. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your first witness.
Could we call witness Zuri O'Neill to the stand?
Okay.
Calling Zuri O'Neill to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony that you're about to give will fully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, you may begin.
Good evening, Mr. O'Neill. What do you do for a living?
I work in journalism. I'm an intern at Atlantis News Nightly currently.
Do you know Lee Croddy?
Yes.
And how do you know of Lee Croddy?
I first discovered her doing research for my employer, but eventually I became a fan of her news outlets and videos.
Have you ever met her?
Yes, we've met online. We've spoken in group chats quite often now, maybe 2-3 times per week. We've also met in person at meet and greets she's hosted for her fan base.
You just mentioned group chats now. Could you elaborate on what those are, please?
Yeah, so the group chat sessions online where Lee and other followers of her news outlet would get together to discuss current issues.
Could you describe the tone of these group chats?
I could say they could get pretty heated at times. We like to discuss certain issues with passion, but it was always harmless venting amongst friends. It was a good place to debate political issues, but without promoting violence or anything illegal.
Objection,
And what
Your Honor,
topics?
speculation.
I'm sorry, the objection?
Speculation.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Well, go ahead, sure.
I'm asking for a lay opinion about the tone of the group chats. It's not outside of his, outside of the scope of knowledge for this witness to understand the group chats. And I'm just asking for a lay opinion.
All right, the court will overrule that objection. You may continue.
Thank you. May I ask the question again? Or the next question?
Sure, go ahead.
What topics are usually discussed in these group chats?
They typically involved sneak peeks of videos or brand deals that Lee was planning to promote, or perhaps some of the political issues that Lee was discussing at the time.
I'd like to turn your attention to February 15th. Do you remember that day?
Yes, I do.
What happened that day?
Objection, Your Honor, vague and ambiguous.
I'm referring to a specific day. I think that's...
Your Honor, may be heard.
The court will sustain that objection. You may rephrase.
Where were you on February 15th and what were you doing?
I attended an in-person meet and greet for Lee Croddy.
Who was at this meet and greet?
Several fans of Lee's. There was a line, notably, so many people. Ray Montoya was there as well, who I knew from the online group chats.
Could you describe Remy Montoya's demeanor for us?
Yes, of course. She appeared nervous, but waited in line, and eventually when she got to Lee, she was rapidly saying something.
And how did Lee Croddy respond to this?
She grabbed her by her shoulders in a manner to try and calm her down, and then at some point, Miss Montoya made her way to the cafe area.
And how did Miss Montoya act in the cafe?
Well, I tried to speak with her, but she was very short with me, only said yes or no when I tried to chat. She was also kicking something under the table, but I couldn't really see what it was.
Did you eventually leave this meet and greet event?
Yes, I did.
Did you notice anything out of the ordinary when you left?
No, not at all. Lee, Miss Montoya, and several other fans were still enjoying the event when I left.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. O'Neill.
Good evening.
Let's start by talking about the group chat. The name and address of Drew Marshak were visible in the sneak peeks sent to the group chat on February 12th, correct?
Yes.
And in the final video, Lee Croddy directly calls for the viewers to demand information from Drew Marshak. Isn't that true?
It is, but I didn't commit no crime.
Sorry, Mr. O'Neill, it's simply a yes or no question.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, moving on to the meet and greet on Saturday. You saw Remy Montoya at the meet and greet. Isn't that true?
Yes, I did.
You saw Remy talking to Lee at the meet and greet, right?
Yeah, she was very frantic.
Remy had a backpack or briefcase with her. Isn't that true?
Yeah, it was something like that.
And lastly, in your opinion, Mr. O'Neill, Lee Croddy's words are meant to be taken literally and at face value. Isn't that true?
For the most part, but as I said, I committed
simply
crime.
a yes or no question.
Well, it is a gray area. It says he, for the most part, is, but I didn't commit a crime.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Your Honor, Mr. O'Neill, on your witness statement, page 42, lines 1 through 6, it says, Lee does not beat around the bush. Lee's words leave very little room for interpretation. Lee's words mean what they mean on a surface level. There is no subtext or hidden meaning. Lee is a straight shooter. Isn't that true?
Yes.
So now I'll re-ask the question. In your opinion, are Lee Croddy's words meant to be taken literally and at face value?
Most of the time.
Does your witness statement refer to most of the time or all of the time?
Most likely all of the time, but there's always gray areas.
So are you telling the truth then or are you telling the truth now?
all the time he is very straightforward.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Cross-examination?
That was cross-examination.
Excuse me, redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness?
The defense would like to call up Dr. Jes Beeart.
Okay.
Calling Dr. Jes Beeart to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
Thank you.
All right,
What do you do for a living? Excuse me.
It's okay, you may begin when ready.
Thank you. What do you do for a living?
I'm an associate professor of sociology, focusing on activism and social movements at Peterson University.
Why were you asked to testify this case?
I was asked to review the record in the case and form an opinion as to whether Remy Montoya acted independently of a political influencer like Lee Croddy.
Before we talk about your opinion, could you tell us about your training and education?
After receiving my bachelor's in sociology from Peterson University, I went on to earn my PhD in sociology. I've dedicated my research to social movements and have published numerous articles in several magazines, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal.
What have you specifically researched about social movements?
I've focused on the success of these movements as they've switched to social media, and I found that the most effective movements were led by youth and young adults.
What has your research found with regard to these youthful social media movements?
There's typically a lead activist to the movement who could be seen as a catalyst for others to take action separate from the leader.
Let's turn to the case at hand. What did you observe in Lee Croddy's interactions with their fans?
I saw Ms. Croddy as someone who seeks to inspire others to take independent action, without Ms. Croddy participating in those actions herself. Ms. Croddy's videos and communications were consistently framed as a means of getting information out to the world, not eliciting illegal activity.
When reviewing this case, what did you observe about the relationship between an activist like Ms. Croddy and a fan of hers, Remy Montoya?
Sure. Ms. Croddy's interactions with Ms. Montoya are pretty typical of how activist movements begin online before carrying out to the in-person world. They usually grow out of a fandom where the fan or follower idealizes the political influencer that they follow. In my field of research, these fans are referred to as stans.
What are stans?
They are hardcore fans of the person that they idolize, but they can take matters into their own hands and act on their own. I've seen Generation Z stans join forces online to promote collaborations or causes that they believe in, and it's almost never prompted by the person or group that they idolize.
In your professional opinion, and based on your review of the record, was Ms. Montoya able to act independently of Lee Croddy?
Yes.
Why?
Objection, Your Honor, this question is lead-in.
Overruled.
After I reviewed the evidence in this case, I believe that Ms. Montoya acted independently. Although Ms. Croddy encouraged her followers to demand information, she never actually encouraged any illegal activity. Ms. Montoya took it upon herself to actually commit a crime, but those were her actions and her actions alone.
Finally, what did you observe about Ms. Montoya's behavior in relation to Ms. Croddy's role as an influencer?
In my professional opinion, it seems that Ms. Montoya would have been able to separate her adoration of Ms. Croddy from the reality of her actions and act independently. She fits the profile of a stan, whose love for her idol goes beyond the idol themselves. This resulted in Ms. Montoya taking actions on her own, separate from Ms. Croddy.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Dr. Beeart.
Good evening.
You compare the defendant with Greta Thunberg, is that correct?
Yes.
You state that Thunberg, like the defendant, is a catalyst for action rather than someone who directs the actions of others. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, directing action can be defined as explicitly telling someone to perform a particular task, right?
Yes.
Your belief is that Remy was acting independently of the defendant when she broke into Marshak's house. Is that true?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Beeart, do you have what has been previously entered into evidence as Exhibit C on hand?
Just a brief moment, please. Yes, I have it.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the WhatsApp conversation between Lee Croddy and Remy Montoya?
Yes.
Dr. Beeart, can you read lines 29 through 31 of Exhibit C?
I know you do, but we need those documents, Remy. We really need them. You need to get into that house.
Oh, Dr. Beeart, I believe you are mistaken. You're reading from the outdated case packet. Actually, the most updated case packet omits the phrase "really need them."
Okay, my bad. Sorry.
Let's move on. The defendant sent a message telling Remy to go get into Marshak's house and get her confidential documents, correct?
Yes.
In using visual emphasis, the defendant wrote the word "need" in all capital letters, right?
Yes.
Personally instructing somebody to get into another person's house is directing action, is it not, Dr. Beeart?
Yes, but that action was not explicitly stated.
Dr. Beeart, was that a yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Beeart. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, briefly, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
You were asked some questions about Ms. Croddy asking Ms. Montoya to get the documents from Mr. Marshak, and I would like to ask you a follow-up question to this.
Okay.
In your entire review of the record, did you find anywhere that Ms. Croddy promoted violence against others?
I did not. Ms. Croddy's videos and communications with fans were consistent with getting information out to the world and not taking illegal action.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Next witness.
The defense would like to call Erin Sullivan to the stand.
Calling Erin Sullivan to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, you may begin when ready.
Good evening, Ms. Sullivan. What do you do for a living?
I have been Lee Croddy's agent for the past 3 years.
And what do you do as her agent?
I help set up events, schedule appearances, act as liaison with Lee's publicist, and work with both the legal and business sides of Lee's brand.
You just mentioned the legal side of Lee's brand. Could you elaborate on that?
Of course. I ensure that anytime Lee's going to advocate for a certain cause or directly ask for action from her followers, that it is cleared legally and make sure that there are no law violations. Very rarely does Lee take any action without first consulting me or the full legal team.
And why is that?
Of course, Lee doesn't want to do anything to jeopardize her brand or financial livelihood, so we have a team in place to prevent that from happening.
I'd like to direct your attention to February 15th of 2020. Do you remember that day?
I do.
And what were you doing on that day?
I attended a meet and greet event for Lee and her fans.
Do you recall who was in attendance?
There were several fans. One in particular I recall is Remy Montoya.
Could you describe for the jury when you first noticed Ms. Montoya?
I saw her approach Lee. Lee gave an embrace before Lee showed Ms. Montoya to a nearby table.
And did Ms. Montoya stay at that nearby table?
Initially, but then she got up and stood in a corner.
Did Lee discuss this with you at all?
Yes, she did, but she asked me to keep an eye on Ms. Montoya and that she was having some kind of an episode.
And you just said that Lee asked you to keep an eye on her? Does that seem unusual to you? Or did that at the time seem unusual to you?
No, it did not.
And why not?
Lee always looked out for her fans, whether they were new viewers or longtime viewers. Lee has gone above and beyond for many of her fans because she acts more as a friend rather than an internet celebrity.
And finally, could you describe Lee's demeanor when she first saw Ms. Montoya?
She seemed fine, and even as the event ended, Lee left and said goodbye to her fans with a smile.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Sullivan.
Good evening.
Ms. Sullivan, as an agent, your reputation in your field is directly tied to the success of your clients, correct?
Yes.
Similarly, your financial livelihood is also directly tied to the success of your clients. Is that right?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't see the relevance in this questioning.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes, response.
Seeing as what Ms. Sullivan has to lose and gain from this trial impacts her testimony, I think it's incredibly relevant that the court hear this information.
In terms of bias?
Yes.
Overruled, go ahead.
Ms. Sullivan, would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please.
Similarly, your financial livelihood is also directly tied to the success of your clients. Is that right?
That is correct.
And Lee Croddy is a very prominent client of yours, correct?
Yes.
Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that the outcome of this court case could have a significant impact on your career, right?
Right.
Moving on. Ms. Sullivan, you've observed the defendant's interactions with many of their fans. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And amongst all of these interactions, the defendant's conversation with Remy Montoya stood out to you as unique, correct?
Correct.
From their various actions, such as the embrace they shared, you assume that the defendant knew Remy quite well, correct?
Yes.
In fact, you even recalled her referring to Remy as a friend when she asked you to keep an eye on her, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. That will be all.
All right, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Ms. Sullivan, when you came to the stand, you were sworn in, is that correct?
Yes.
You swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you mean those words?
I did.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any other witnesses for the defense?
Yes, the defense would like to call Lee Croddy to the stand.
Okay.
Calling Lee Croddy to the stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
Thank you.
Before I start, could I ask for a brief time check?
Sure, time check, please.
The defense has 5 minutes and 20 seconds remaining for direct examinations, and the prosecution has 5 minutes and 30 seconds remaining for cross-examination.
Thank you.
You may begin.
Ms. Croddy, what do you do for a living?
I'm a journalist and I have my own company, an online news source called The Right Choice of News. It's a news channel on YouTube that covers certain topics that aren't necessarily covered by typical or mainstream media outlets. I make videos for my fans and my followers, as well as for some newcomers to my channel.
Aside from posting videos onto your channel, how else do you interact with your subscribers?
In 2019, I started hosting group chats or online chat sessions with my fans. I used it to interact with my subscribers, send them sneak peeks of videos I was going to make, and I also sent them brand deals to test out content before it went to a larger audience.
Do you know Remy Montoya?
I do. She was a member of one of my group chats, along with Zuri O'Neill and a few other people. We weren't too close, but she's a fan who I respected.
I would like to turn your attention to February 9th, 2020. Do you remember that day?
Yes, that was when I discovered a blank envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a memo and a supplemental report written by Drew Marshak from the Bureau of Investigation, and the memo confirmed the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrial beings.
How did you react?
I was excited about this new information, so a few days after, I sent a sneak peek of the videos I was going to make about the documents to a group chat, the one with Remy Montoya and Zuri O'Neill in it. In the video, I shared some information on the memo with them.
Aside from sharing it in the group chat, did you share the information about the memo to anyone else?
Yes, I shared it on my YouTube channel to the rest of my viewers, except on YouTube, I made sure to blur out Drew Marshak's name. I forgot to do that in the group chats and I felt terrible. It was an accident.
What message did you deliver in the video?
I stated that I was going to march straight into the government official's home and take the information that rightfully belonged to us.
Did you mean it?
No, I did not.
Why did you say it?
I wanted to motivate my fan base. I wanted to keep them interested in our cause, which is peaceful and nonviolent. I didn't expect anyone to break into Miss Marshak's home and steal from her.
I would now like to talk to you about February 13th, 2020. Do you remember what you did that day?
Yes, I had a text message conversation with Remy Montoya about going to Miss Marshak's home and asking for documents.
What did you want Miss Montoya to do?
Well, I wanted to motivate her. We had an event coming up, and I expected that she would go to Miss Marshak's home and maybe demand the documents, not break in or steal them. And then after, she would join us at the event.
When did you next see Miss Montoya?
I saw her the next day on February 15th at my meet and greet, but it took a second to recognize her.
Could you describe her demeanor?
She was rambling about something incoherent, and I couldn't make out a word.
How did you respond?
I cared about her well-being, so I had her stick around to help her try and relax, and then I had my agent keep an eye out on her.
Why did you do that?
I care about my fans and their well-being. I want to help them in any way that I can.
How did you intend to help her?
2 minutes.
I had her stick around until the end of the meeting and then asked her to come over to stay the night at my house.
What happened on the way to your house?
She was in the car and she was kicking around a briefcase and it sounded hollow, so I asked her if it was a prop.
How did she respond?
She was upset when I asked her and I tried to calm her down.
Did she ever show you what was inside the briefcase?
No, she didn't. She kept it to herself the entire time.
When you were at your house, where did Miss Montoya stay?
She wanted to see my hidden bunker, but I wasn't comfortable with that, so I let her stay in my guest house where my guests normally stay.
What happened the next morning?
I saw the police show up and they placed Miss Montoya under arrest for burglary and assault.
How did you react when Officer Bird arrived?
I cooperated, I spoke to him and even showed him where Miss Montoya was staying. I had nothing to hide and I wanted to help.
1 minute.
When you invited Miss Montoya into your home, were you already aware that she had committed a crime?
No, I had no idea. I would never do anything like that. I just tried to help her and let her stay as a guest in my guest house. If I had known what she did, I would never let her stay.
Did you plan with her to burglarize Miss Marshak's home?
I did not. That's not who I am. I don't promote illegal behavior or anything like that.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may begin.
Good evening, Ms. Croddy.
Good evening.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Croddy, do you have a copy of Exhibit C on hand?
I can find it. Yes.
Are you familiar with Exhibit C?
One moment, please. Yes, I am.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of your WhatsApp conversation with Remy Montoya as you remember it?
Yes.
On page 50, lines 29 through 31 of the updated case packet, you sent a text to Remy Montoya that read, "I know you do, but we need those documents, Remy. You really need to get into that house tomorrow." Is that correct?
Yeah, I did say that.
Ms. Croddy, on February 15th, the day of your meet and greet, several of your fans were present in Beacon Hills, correct?
Yeah, it was a meet and greet for everyone.
You specifically chose Remy Montoya to ask if she could get the documents. Is that right?
Yes, well, I also encouraged all of my viewers to
yes or
no? What was that?
Is that a yes or a no to asking Ms. Montoya if she could get the documents?
I asked her and the rest of my viewers in my YouTube video.
But specifically with relation to direct messaging her and directly reaching out, you only asked Ms. Montoya. Is that right?
Yeah.
You did this knowing that in the past, Ms. Montoya admitted to being violent towards someone she saw as an opposition to your movement. Is that right?
Yes, well, I respect anyone who can stand up for me.
Did you or did you not reach out to Remy Montoya with knowledge that she had committed a violent act in the past?
I know that she did what she did.
In fact, you admired Ms. Montoya for this show of dedication to your movement, right?
Yeah.
Ms. Croddy, do you have a copy of Exhibit B on hand?
Yes, I do.
Are you familiar with Exhibit B?
Yes.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of that Twitter group chat as you remember it?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to move Exhibit B into evidence?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so Exhibit B will be received and admitted.
Ms. Croddy, on page 49, lines 19 through 21, it's transcribed that you sent a message reading, "The person who wrote these reports was stupid enough to leave their name on it. I'll march right up to Marshak and demand the information." Is that correct?
I said that, but not everyone should be taking my words literally. I often speak in
Croddy, did you say this or not?
Objection, argumentative.
I'm sorry, the objection?
Argumentative.
Overruled.
To clarify, the person you were referring to in that message was Agent Zhou Marshak, correct?
Yes.
In the sneak peek of the video you sent to this same group chat on February 12th, Zhou Marshak's full name and address were visible, is that right?
Yes, it was an accident. I was just excited to get content out to my viewers.
So you admonished Ms. Marshak for not omitting her personal information, something you yourself admittedly forgot to do?
Yes, in the group chat, but then I made sure to blur it on the YouTube channel. I felt really bad.
Ms. Croddy, do you have a copy of Exhibit A on hand?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Exhibit A?
I am.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the briefcase as you remember it?
Yes, but I didn't get too good of a look at the briefcase in the car.
Ms. Croddy, the briefcase has the name D. Marshak on it, does it not?
It does.
It also has a logo for the California Department of Justice, right?
Yes, but in the car I didn't get to see it too well.
During your car ride with Remy after the meet and greet, you saw that same briefcase and thought it was official looking, did you not?
Yeah, but it was really hollow, so I just assumed it was.
A no to thinking the briefcase was official looking.
It looked official looking.
And once you returned to your home with Remy, you took her through a back entrance to your guest house. Is that right?
Yeah, I wasn't too comfortable with letting her stay in my bunker.
Ms. Croddy, the question requires a yes or no answer.
What was the question?
The question was whether you took Remy through a back entrance to your guest house once you returned home with her.
I did.
Ms. Croddy, you have said that after seeing the state Ms. Montoya was in at the meet and greet, you were genuinely concerned for her well-being, were you not?
Yes, I was. She looked very worried.
Ms. Croddy, you've testified that you care deeply about your fans. Is that right?
Yes.
You completed the professional role of socializing with fans even after you deemed Ms. Montoya as visibly shaken, correct?
Can you ask it again?
Yes. Did you complete your professional role of socializing with fans at the meet and greet even after you deemed Ms. Montoya as visibly shaken?
Yes, but I don't only communicate with my fans in a professional manner.
And do you trust the advice of your agent, Erin Sullivan?
Yeah.
And rather than seeking professional help from Ms. Montoya, as your agent, Erin Sullivan, advised you to do,
30 seconds.
took her straight back to your home, correct?
I did.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Could I ask how much time I have for redirect?
Sure, go ahead. Time check.
The defense has 30 seconds remaining for redirect.
Thank you. Ms. Croddy, you were asked some questions on cross-examination about your text messages with Remy Montoya. I'd like to ask about that. In that conversation, did you ever ask Ms. Montoya to break into Zhou Marshak's house?
No, I didn't. And I specifically told her not to do anything that I wouldn't do. And obviously I'm not for breaking the law.
Did you ever ask her to assault or take Zhou Marshak's property by force?
No, not at all.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any other witnesses for the defense?
No, Your Honor. Can this witness be excused?
Yes, the witness may be excused. And any other evidence from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so the defense rests. Prosecution, why don't we go ahead and turn to closing arguments? Prosecution, are you prepared to go forward?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. When Remy Montoya punched and robbed Drew Marshak on February 15th, 2020, she was not acting alone. While it is true that she had committed a crime, she did so at the behest of a manipulator, a puppet master, if you will. Your Honor, it was the defendant who fueled Remy's obsession, singled her out for the crime, and convinced the young fan to carry out an act that she will regret for the rest of her life. Now, opposing counsel champions the theme of actions speaking louder than words, but they conveniently ignore Lee's words that led to the action. In fact, Lee's own actions, from her ordering Remy to get the documents to her hiding her after the act, shows more than anything that she did orchestrate the crime. Now, expert witness Dr. Kai Chavez has revealed that since the very beginning, Lee used the group chats between her and her followers to perpetuate a toxic environment of groupthink, using inflammatory rhetoric and angry rants to create a hostile mentality among her fans. Your Honor, it was through this process of conformity and toxicity that the defendant ensured Remy's absolute loyalty to her cause. Now, Calcrum 404.1 explained that the defendant is aiding and abetting a crime when they know that the perpetrator meant to commit a crime and still consciously help them do so. Your Honor, it is beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant did just that. First, the defendant urgently pressured Remy to get the documents through private messages. We need those documents, Remy. You really need to get into that house. Your Honor, these aren't the words of a kind or sympathetic person. These are the words of a puppet master pressuring a follower into committing a crime. Let's not forget that Lee Croddy is a professional journalist who knows just how powerful words can be. When the defendant was the one that indoctrinated Remy to her cause before ordering her to get the documents at all costs, it is clear that she knew exactly what Remy planned to do. Even Zuri O'Neill of the defense admits that Lee Croddy's words are meant to be taken literally and at face value. Your Honor, if she said she needed the documents, that meant she needed the documents. When she said she needed Remy to get into Drew's house, she meant exactly that. Second, Officer Bird reported how just days before, the defendant had given Remy the name and address of Drew Marshak, clear proof of aiding and abetting. Not only did the puppet master pressure Remy into committing a crime, she also gave her all the tools needed to do so. Your Honor, it is no coincidence that out of all of her fans, the defendant singled out Remy Montoya, whom she knew for a fact had the address of Drew Marshak and whom she knew had a history of violent behavior to her cause to carry out the crime. Now, Calcrum 440 furthers that the defendant accessory if they knew that the perpetrator had committed a crime and still aided them in order for them to avoid arrest. Once again, Your Honor, it is beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant did just that. Remy Montoya herself revealed how after punching and robbing Drew Marshak, she had told the defendant that she had gotten the documents and that she had a run-in with Ms. Marshak. Having just sent Remy to steal classified government documents, the defendant knew for a fact that Remy had broken the law. Even on the car ride back, Remy exclaimed that the government briefcase was not a prop. 2 instances that ensured the defendant knew exactly what Remy had done. Instead of turning her into the police, however, or getting her professional help, as suggested by Erin Sullivan, the defendant instead took Remy in through the back entrance of her house. This, Your Honor, clearly meets the second condition of accessory. Housing a known criminal and taking her in through a back entrance is clear indication that the defendant was aiding the perpetrator in order for her to avoid arrest. At the end of the day, Your Honor, it is beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant knew Remy meant to commit a crime, helped them do so, and aided them afterward. Like a puppet master pulling the strings, the defendant ensured Remy's unwavering loyalty through a toxic groupthink environment before pressuring her to commit the crime while giving her all the tools needed to do so. After the act, the defendant, with full knowledge of what had just transpired, took Remy to her house and hid them there by using a back entrance. Your Honor, the defendant has transformed Remy Montoya from a hopeful young fan into a criminal. The defendant has caused both physical and psychological pain to the victim, Drew Marshak. In the name of justice for the people, the state of California respectfully requests a verdict of guilty on both charges. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. Is the defense prepared to give its closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead. Whenever you're ready.
Actions speak louder than words. In this trial, Your Honor, the actions spoke loud and clear and revealed one lone criminal actor, Remy Montoya. Ms. Montoya broke into the home by herself, burglarized it, assaulted a government agent by herself, and stole confidential documents by herself. She then signed a cooperation agreement to benefit herself, because after all, her punishment is waiting on the outcome of this trial, and that's the best this prosecution can do. Hope you believe the words of someone gaining a benefit for their testimony to prove the actions of another. And that's not even close enough to meeting their burden today in court. The prosecution has the burden to prove both charges beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. That means that they must remove each and every single doubt from your minds that is reasonable for each and every single element of these crimes. Starting with count 1, aiding and abetting a burglary. They failed to prove that Lee knew that Ms. Montoya would break into the home, assault Ms. Marshak, and steal these documents. And they failed to prove that Lee ever encouraged this type of behavior. First, the prosecution has to answer this question. If these documents were so important and necessary for Lee, why didn't Ms. Montoya ever reveal them to Lee, or anyone for that matter? The prosecution's entire theory rested on the idea that Lee wanted these documents. They were urgent, and they needed them for this event. While Lee did ask Ms. Montoya to demand the documents, she also told her not to do anything she wouldn't do, as in, not to do anything illegal. Lee would not jeopardize her entire career on something like this. Ms. Montoya kept those documents to herself because she stole them herself. Those were her actions and her actions alone. And she knew if Lee were to find out about what she did, she would be removed from the event because Lee wouldn't stand for it. Even here today in court, she couldn't remember what she told Lee, but the truth is, she wasn't saying much at all. During trial, you heard from Zuri O'Neill, another fan of Lee's, and he explained that Lee did not support or endorse criminal behavior. Mr. O'Neill was also at the event, knew Ms. Montoya, and tried to speak with her, but she wasn't saying many words. So if these documents were so important, why were they kept secret? Wouldn't Lee have made copies of these documents, posted them online, or shared them with her followers? The truth is, Your Honor, Ms. Montoya never revealed these documents because she knew what she did was wrong, and she didn't want anyone to find out, because she knew she would be rejected by the group. This is exactly what Dr. Jes Beeart told you. This was not just a simple fan, it was a stan, someone who was obsessed with her idol, Lee Croddy, and her obsession turned her into a lone criminal actor who took things way too far. The prosecution also has to answer this question. If Lee truly had a plan and intent for Ms. Montoya to burglarize Ms. Marshak's home, then why did Ms. Montoya go up to Ms. Marshak's front door and knock on it in broad daylight, almost like an Amazon delivery person? Does that sound like an organized plan to commit a burglary? Does it sound like a plan at all? Clearly, there was no plan. And if there's no plan, there's no intent to aid and abet. It's for these reasons, Your Honor, that you should find Ms. Croddy not guilty on count 1. For the second count, accessory after the fact, the prosecution has failed to prove that Lee knew a felony was committed and then tried to hide that information from police afterwards. The prosecution has to answer this question as well. If Lee really knew what happened, would she have acted the way she did at the event? You heard from Erin Sullivan, Lee's agent, and she testified that Lee enjoyed the event with her fans and left with a smile. Would Lee really be smiling if she was harboring a criminal in her midst? Of course not. Lee even invited Ms. Montoya back to her home, and even though there was a perfect place to hide Ms. Montoya in Lee's bunker, Lee had her stay in a guest house because she was a guest, not an accomplice. At least that's what Lee thought. And how was Lee to know? Even back at her house, Ms. Montoya refused to explain to Lee what she did or even show Lee anything she stole. If Lee really knew a felon was staying in her home, she would have asked her to leave immediately. And if you need proof of that, Your Honor, look no farther than their actions the next day when the police showed up. The actions of Ms. Montoya and Lee could not be more different. Officer Bird told us that Ms. Montoya was frantic, panicked, and causing a commotion. Meanwhile, Lee was calm, cool, collected, and most importantly, cooperated with the investigation. The actions and behavior speak volumes.
1 minute.
Ms. Montoya was acting like she had something to hide, and Lee wasn't. Your Honor, it's clear that Lee had no idea that a crime was committed, nor did she hide any evidence. That is why you have to find not guilty on count 2, Your Honor. There's one last thing worth mentioning, and it truly sums up what happened here. If you recall, Remy Montoya stated during the burglary, Lee is not going to like this. It was in that moment that she realized she made a big mistake and was alone in her actions. One lone criminal actor. It's for these
30
reasons
seconds.
I ask you to find Ms. Croddy not guilty of both charges. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Rebuttal from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Opposing counsel champions this idea that Remy entered some sort of plea bargain, but my opponents are referring to stipulation 7, which never mentions the words plea bargain once. It never implies any kind of deal between Remy and the prosecution. Stipulation 7 is simply talking about Remy agreeing to give truthful testimony verbatim on the matter after already pleading guilty, which she has so far fulfilled. Now, opposing counsel next claims that Remy did all of these actions on her own. But once again, this is simply not true. Lee Croddy ensured her loyalty through a toxic groupthink environment, singled Remy out for her violent behavior, and ordered her to get the documents at all costs, and also gave her the address to get the documents in the first place. At the end of the day, Your Honor, without Lee Croddy's actions, none of this would have happened. And let us not forget that after confession, instead of turning her into the police or getting her professional help, Lee hid her in her home using a back entrance, which is why the state of California requests a verdict of guilty.
Thank you. Rebuttal from the defense.
Your Honor, the truth is simple and it cannot be bought or sold. Yet that is exactly what the prosecution is trying to do here. They are buying testimony with the cooperation agreement with Ms. Montoya that she agreed to, and she's telling them the drama they desperately need. If their case was so strong, why give her any benefit at all? The real puppet master is the DA's office, because the strings are attached to their main witness in the form of a cooperation agreement, and they pull those strings to get this witness potentially out of the jailhouse and onto the witness stand.
30 seconds.
She knows it, they know it, and we all know it. This is a case where an obsessed fan took things way too far and became a lone criminal actor. Ms. Montoya even said during trial when she entered Ms. Marshak's house, those were her own actions as well. Lastly, while Lee is literal most of the time, Mr. O'Neill did not go out and commit a crime on behalf of Lee. Please find Ms. Croddy not guilty on both charges. Thank you.
All right, thank you to both sides for your presentation, as well as presentation of the evidence. Before the court rules on the verdict or renders a verdict, the students may confer with their attorney, teacher, coaches regarding any trial irregularities. And so please go ahead and do that now. The timekeeper will give us 60 seconds.
Thirty seconds.
The prosecution finds no irregularities, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Defense?
No irregularities here either.
All right, thank you both. The court is prepared to announce and render a verdict in this matter. With respect to count one, aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary, the court does find, based upon the evidence and the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, sufficient to render a verdict of guilty. In particular, the written words of the exhibits are quite compelling, at least to the court, sufficient that that the other side, or at least the defendant, certainly would understand that they were aiding and abetting this burglary. With respect to count number 2, the court also finds beyond a reasonable doubt sufficient evidence to warrant a guilty verdict in light of the evidence that's been submitted. There's sufficient evidence to demonstrate that the defendant did have sufficient knowledge that the crime had been committed and that there was actually evidence at the time taken that was actually at the time they brought the person into the home. So the court would render a guilty verdict on both counts. Now, before we go any further,